clearly as I traveled around and was looking at that from a business standpoint. I wanted to make sure that the business community had some advocate in terms of what was going on in our state. So I have served with the MEDC and the Life Science Corridor and its successors for almost 10 years, so I got some additional insights about trying to bring jobs to the state of Michigan. And over that 10-year period of time, serving both under Governor Engler and then under Governor Granholm, I started to see the job situation start declining, and we started to move faster in the deceleration. And I was just shocked to see, after looking at what happened between 2000 and 2010, that we lost 500,000 jobs, but I was stunned that it was half of all the jobs in the United States. And that just set me back. So as an investor and as a mentor and a business person, we got together with a couple other CEOs and we started the Business Leaders for Michigan. And our effort was, in starting that 3 years ago, was to put a turnaround plan together and having a plan, a strategic plan for the state. To do that, we had to then find legislators and candidates who were interested in the turnaround plan, and we worked hard to support them. So we were just getting tired over the prior 8 years of having one-time fixes, budget shortfalls, all this harangue and accounting gimmicks as we looked at the deficits we're facing in the state of Michigan. So thankfully, with the help of Governor Rick Snyder and the rest of the legislature, we've reversed the trends and are started to focus on addressing our unfunded liabilities and starting to invest for the future again in the state of Michigan. So the impact that it's had in the investment and the turnaround, you can see the unemployment's declining, jobs coming back, and so forth. It's been very, very, very important. But as Rick Baker has mentioned in one of his latest articles in talking about what the state's risks are from the standpoint of the prosperous and magnetic business climate that we're growing in, what we're at risk for is we're at risk in terms of what's going on with the federal spending, which needs to be addressed. And certainly when you add the federal spending with the uncommitted liabilities, it's a significant issue that does threaten Michigan, even though it's a federal issue, because of we're moving on our turnaround plan. But
there's only 2 states in the United States that have lost jobs in the last 20 to 30 years, meaning there are fewer jobs today than 20, 30 years ago. Michigan and my current home state, Connecticut. If you look at the federal government, the problem is not today's deficits, it's not today's debt, as shocking as those numbers are. It's the tens of trillions of dollars of unfunded promises for Medicare, for Social Security, and a range of commitments and contingencies that aren't on the balance sheet today, that don't represent deficits and debt today, but they will tomorrow. That's going to change the course. They are multiple times greater than what you see. This is the 100-year anniversary this month of the sinking of the Titanic. What we see is the ice above the iceberg. But what could literally sink the ship of state is the ice below the waterline that is much, much greater. The problem exists at the federal level, and bad news flows downhill. The truth is the federal government's grown too big, promised too much, waited too long to restructure. It's going to have to restructure. That means it's going to spend less overtime and tax more. That means people are going to get less and have to pay more. Since bad news flows downhill, state and local governments are going to feel it. The typical state relies upon the federal government for 1/3 to over 40% of its revenues. That is not a realistic assumption going forward. The federal government's going to have to do less. State and local governments rely on each other as well. So again, the bad news will flow downhill. Many states have grown too big, promised too much, waited too long to restructure. Many states have huge underfunded pension plan obligations, huge unfunded retiree health obligations, similar to the type of obligations the federal government has for Medicare and Social Security. Those are going to have to be restructured. The sooner you do it, the better, because it's inevitable it's going to have to be done. So that you can do it in a more reasonable, responsible, compassionate, fashion.
The prevailing wisdom, from what I hear in Washington, is whatever you do, yes, there's a debt problem, but don't harm or don't kill the recovery, because then you'll be worse off than you are now, despite the debt. You agree?
Short term, let's make more investments. Let's let's put a plan in place that will deal with our structural problem. No significant spending reductions and no significant tax increases now, but we need to have a plan that will start phasing in so that we can get the power of compounding working for us. Keep in mind, the most powerful force on the earth is the power of compounding. And the sooner you make tough choices, the sooner it works for you. Right now, when you kick the can down the road, it's compounding against us. And I do believe that you don't want to do things that could end up helping undercut our efforts there. So that means that you don't have dramatic spending cuts. You don't have significant tax increases right now. That would be fundamentally imprudent and counterproductive. And as I said, the true threat is not what's going on today. The true threat is what lies ahead. So, that being said, what you have to have is a plan that will end up addressing the true threat. The large and growing deficits that lie ahead are driven by aging societies, the baby boom generation, and rising healthcare costs. And so what we have to do is have a plan that will reimpose tough budget controls, tougher than the ones that we had in the 90s that expired at the end of 2002, and we've been out of control ever since. But we have to phase them in, tougher budget controls. We've got to reform social insurance programs. That's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, to make them solvent, sustainable, secure, but affordable over time. We need to reduce defense and other spending without compromising national security. And we need to engage in comprehensive tax reform that will make it simpler, fairer, more competitive, and more equitable, and generate more money, right? And we're going to have to do that in a so-called grand bargain. Because in order to make it politically feasible, you have to address both the spending and the revenues at the same time. My personal view, 3-part spending reduction, 1 part revenue. But how you achieve those matters, and how you phase that in matters. So, I would also argue that we actually need to make some additional investments in the short term because we have a deteriorating infrastructure. We need to do more in basic research. The shocking thing about the federal budget when you analyze it is, over 60% of the budget is on autopilot. And of the less than 40% that's controlled, it's all investments in our future, and it's all of the express and enumerated responsibilities envisioned by the Founding Fathers under the Constitution. So in summary, what's going on, government's grown bigger, it's doing more things that aren't expressly in the Constitution, it's spending more and more consumption on seniors, less and less on investments and young people. That's not a prescription for prosperity in the future.
Talked about a grand plan. Harry Reid, John Boehner, and the president have proven that they're not capable of making a grand plan or a grand agreement or a grand compromise. When you talk about the kind of things you talk about, it takes all of those folks, or at least as it stands now. You've been in Washington for a long time. You understand how that process works. Is it going to take something like the business leaders in Michigan? Are you going to have to go around the country and develop this big coalition to bring pressure on these elected officials to come up with that? Because clearly in the debt ceiling debate and any number of other places where this grand compromise was supposed to come about, something doesn't.
I think several things have to happen. First, there are 2 segments of the U.S. population that are underengaged in this fight for America's future. The first is business owners and community owners. And the second is young people. It's their future. Their future is being mortgaged at record rates, investments in their future are being cut, and they're going to face a lot tougher competition. So those 2 groups have to get much more informed and involved. And in addition to that, the president, whoever it is, whether it's Barack Obama in his second term, whether it's Mitt Romney or somebody else, or whether it's a third choice, and there will be a third choice in 2012, whoever the president is going to have to make this issue a top priority. He's going to have to commit to use the bully pulpit to go directly to the American people with facts and truth and tough choices and a way forward, so that the people will then put pressure on the politicians to work with the president to act in the interest of the country rather than their personal interest or their political party's interest. Washington is badly broken. Partisanship has never been worse, and the ideological divide has never been greater.
Will you be on that ticket?
There's a draft moving for me. I'm not running. I have no expectation that I'll run. What I care about is, frankly, what I'd like to do is I'd like to do what Ross Perot did in 1992 without running for president. And to be able to work with whoever is elected president to actually solve these problems. That's what I would prefer to do. So, but my mama taught me a long time ago, you never say no. I'm not trying to be cute with you. I'm just trying to be honest with you.
You talked, you touched briefly on it about the immorality with regards to the current fiscal situation of the future generations. Would you mind expanding on that?
Yeah. Part of what America has always been about is opportunity. And part of what America has always been about is stewardship. And what stewardship means is if you're a leader, no matter what sector you're in, not just generating positive results today, not just leaving things better off when you leave than when you came, but leaving it better positioned for the future. And the truth is, this country is not discharging its stewardship responsibility to younger people, to the earth, and in other regards. Just the fact. The country was founded on certain basic principles and values that made us great, and that were violated. Limited but effective government. Individual liberty and opportunity, rule of law and equal justice under the law, fiscal responsibility and intergenerational equity, just to name a few. We're violating all of those today. And while you need to constantly improve because the world changes and society changes, there are certain kinds of time-tested principles and values that you shouldn't stray from. So we need to come back to those time-tested principles and values, but then actually have a plan, have a budget, have metrics, re-engineer government to make it more future-focused, more results-oriented, more successful, and more sustainable. If other countries can do it, we can do it. We just need to get on with it.
What's your opinion of the Ryan budget that passed the House?
Paul Ryan's a friend of mine. I have friends on both sides of the aisle. He deserves a lot of credit from the standpoint of having the actual courage to come up with a budget and specifics. They're very controversial. In my view, when you look at a plan to put our finances in order, it needs to meet several tests. First, an economic test, pro-growth. Second, it needs to be socially equitable. We need a solvent, sustainable, secure social safety. Number three, culturally acceptable. The American people won't accept the size of government or the level of taxation as yours. Fourthly, a math test. The math's got to work based upon reasonable assumptions. Fifthly, it's got to be politically feasible, meaning pass the House, get 60 votes in the Senate, and presidential signature. And sixth, you got to get bipartisan support to be successful and sustainable. His proposal does not meet those tests. It fails several of those tests. And so therefore, while I think some aspects of it are worth serious consideration, it doesn't meet those tests. He got no democratic support. He's not realistic about what the mix is going to have to be as to spending versus revenues. On the other hand, he's right that the problem is primarily a spending problem. He's right, we're going to have a budget for what we allocate to health care like every other major industrialized country, although how he's proposing to do it I don't think is acceptable or feasible.
Can you talk about your Social Security plan?
Oh,
Hey, so
you might not be here at lunch, see, that's right.
No,
All right, let me give you a framework. First, you have to pick an age, and the sooner we act, the lower the age can be. The age is somewhere between 55 and 60. And as I said, the sooner you act, the lower the age can be. People above that line will have little to no effect on the reforms. Why? Because they don't have time to make adjustments, and secondly, because it wouldn't be politically feasible. The younger you are, the better off you are financially, the more you're going to be affected, because you have more time to adjust and you have more financial wherewithal to be able to deal with the adjustment. You maintain a defined benefit program as the base of Social Security, because we have to remember what the second word is in Social Security. It's security, not opportunity. President George W. Bush didn't remember that. So you take the people that are near the poverty level, you actually provide a greater replacement wage benefit, because we have too many people relying solely on Social Security for retirement income. People over 85, on a means-tested basis, you provide somewhat greater benefit, because in many cases they're outliving their resources. People that are better off financially, middle and upper income, you still provide them a benefit, but somewhat less of a benefit than under the current formula, to make it somewhat more means-tested, but not fully means-tested, because you don't want to make it a welfare program, all right? You gradually increase the normal and the early retirement age, 2 to 3 years over 20 to 30 years, phased in prospectively, not just for the spending side, but for the revenue side. When you look at known demographic trends, we have to encourage more people to work longer. They can work longer. We're not in the industrial age. We're in the knowledge age. So we have to do that for a variety of reasons. You can solve the problem. You can look at cost of living and make the cost of living index more reflective of cost of living for seniors, which is different than the population as a whole. You don't have to raise taxes, but to get a deal, raise the taxable wage-based cap from about a little bit less than 110,000 to about 150,000, but don't eliminate it. Don't increase the tax rate. If you do those things, it is solvent, sustainable, secure, forever. And then on top of that base defined benefit program, you add a supplemental, and here's the key word, supplemental individual account, 2 to 3% of pay, payroll deduction, goes into a real trust fund with real investments, with real fiduciary responsibility and liabilities that the government can't touch, that would provide for an increased savings rate for the United States, reduce our dependence on foreign capital, that would provide a pre-retirement death benefit, a supplemental retirement benefit, and something to leave your heirs if you die before that's exhausted. I would argue that is a win-win-win, and at least so far I've gotten 95% plus support for that among, and here's the frustrating thing. Seniors think they're going to get taken advantage of. I could use different words, but I won't, okay? They think they're going to get taken advantage of, and they're not, okay? Young people think they're going to get, as we say in the South, shinola, which means nothing, all right? And they're wrong. All right, so therefore you got a lot of running room, okay? You have an opportunity, as Mike understands, part of leadership and management is about exceeding expectations. I think we got clearly an opportunity to exceed everybody's expectations. But the reason we can't is because A, we don't have leadership, B, because the Democrats are in total denial about the fact that Social Security is already paying out more than it's taken in. It's negative cash flow. It's adding to the deficit. It's underfunded $9 trillion. It gets worth several hundred billion a year. And the Republicans, they don't think that we need more revenues. They're both wrong.